Hi, I'm Peter Rao.
And I am Mike Doran.
Welcome back
to Counterbalance. Nice. It's very good to be here, Peter.
Yes, indeed, because this week we have a bit of an unorthodox show. We don't have a guest, which is to say we have the guest of all guests. Mike Doran himself has offered his pearls of wisdom as this week's
Are you being sarcastic? Are you?
Not at all.
You
it's,
are.
It's very
you're
exciting.
You're treating me with sarcasm.
And
you're denigrating me before we even begin.
The reason why Mike Doran's the guest is because he just put together a trip to Israel, led a Hudson delegation to Israel. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to get your reflections. Mike, welcome to Counterbalance.
Great to be here, Peter. Thank you for having me.
So if you're not familiar with the show, this is a bit of a deep dive, Mike, into issues of the day. And we'll start with your trip to Israel. What did you see? When did you go? What was it like? I should note for the listeners, we obviously won't do a bio for you, but you, as a young man at university, studied in Haifa and have been going back and forth to Israel pretty much ever since.
40 years. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't go for a very long time. And then I was working in the White House in 2005 to 7, and I went then. I had been since then, but it kind of rekindled my interest. Because it brought my professional interest and my personal interest
into
together.
Alignment, yeah.
Yeah. So
how was Israel different this go around?
I think October 7th was. I mean, it's by now it's a cliche to say, but it's a turning point in history. I think it's a civilizational turning point, actually. Not just a turning point for Israel, but I think civilization is on the line. Are we going to fight for the Western order in the Middle East or not? That's what's on the line.
And you felt that when you were in Israel?
Yeah, sure. I felt it before because I think the Biden administration has misdefined the conflict because they have defined it purposely. They have defined it as a war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and that's an improper framing of the conflict. It's objectively it is not that, and I say objectively because the Houthis are firing on ships sailing in the Red Sea to the Suez Canal. Iranian controlled militias are attacking American bases. Hezbollah is attacking Israel in the north. So this is not a war about Gaza. It's about something else. I think it's the Iranian alliance system versus the American alliance system. But the United States has defined it as a war for Gaza.
Why has the U.S. defined it as a narrow, horrific, but nonetheless narrow conflict? And why has Iran chosen to define it as a Iranian versus American alliance matchup?
Yes, Iran has defined it that way, openly, publicly, and we have not accepted the Iranian definition of what it is, and instead have tried to create this fiction that it's about Gaza. Because I think there are lots of different answers to that question, but the simplest and most important answer is that the administration is trying to hold on to its Iran engagement strategy, its strategy of appeasing Iran, really. Some would call it appeasement, and I would, actually. I don't always use the word when I write because I want to kind of convince people who are appeasement is it's a lightning rod, or what's the word I'm looking for? It's a controversial word. But I think it has a kind of sloganeering aspect to it. But I think it is objectively an appeasement policy.
And the Iranians have chosen to go big because they see this as the best way to counter what they presumably also see as the rapprochement outreach strategy of the Americans. Or why would they go this route?
Well, for one, Hamas is an important node in what they call their resistance alliance. So they have to defend it. They can't just offer it up for sacrifice, because unlike us, well, actually, that's a little bit unfair, but they understand that they are they have an alliance system that is working to undermine us and to supplant us, and so they're going to define it this way.
And is it fair then to say, or is it not correct to say that the war has expanded?
The war has expanded in the sense that I don't think that Iran actually planned for. I don't think the October 7th attack was planned and scoped in Tehran. I think it surprised them, the actual day and the scope of the attack. Of course, Iran arms, trains, and equips Hamas, and backs it financially, and backs it out clearly diplomatically and militarily after the fact. So. Iran was party to this from the beginning, but I don't think this was an Iranian plan in the sense that everyone in Tehran knew that on October 7th Hamas was going to storm across the border.
Yeah, I'm on the record that first weekend when asked in a TV interview whether or not the war would expand to predict that I didn't think it would, in the sense that I didn't think Iran would unload its barrels altogether because those are bullets you can really only shoot once. But it's found, I think, ways to move up the escalatory ladder without drawing in the Americans in a big way. Yeah. And it's also found the perfect tool in that the cost of Houthis shooting out into the Red Sea is so small for them, but the pain they're inflicting on the Western world is enormous.
It's enormous. It's disproportionate, and it doesn't. You don't even have to hit anything. You can. If I go into a restaurant and I shoot a bunch of bullets into the roof, into the ceiling.
Yeah, I'm not sticking around to order dessert.
Right, and you're not going to come back.
Right,
and that's what's happening. They've scared off just about all of the commercial shipping. And it's going to be very hard for the United States to bring it all back.
So if you can't bring it back, or it's very hard, how do you at least proceed?
The way to bring it back is to actually deter the Houthis. And so far, I mean, the Houthis started in mid-November, right? And then we started responding meekly in mid-December. We're now in mid-January. They're not deterred.
And that's something that you can accomplish with the Houthis themselves, or do you think that, given their I don't know what to call them, their masters, but certainly their state-backed sponsor in Tehran, do you have to take steps against them as well?
Well, the most effective way is to actually take steps in Tehran.
All right.
But we're not going to do that. I mean, the Biden administration is not going to do that.
Yeah.
Because that endangers their Iran outreach, Iran appeasement strategy, which they are very proud of.
To this day.
To this day, they are absolutely very proud of it. And I'm repeating that, they are very proud of it, because there's a whole school of thought in Washington that, in the pro-Israel community, it surprises me sometimes that they're somehow confused about what they're doing. That the clever Iranians. If I read another article that tells me that chess was invented in Iran by the Persians, I'm going to have a heart attack. But the idea is that these clever Persians are running circles around the dysfunctional Biden administration that doesn't understand what's happening. They understand very well what's happening, and they choose this over the alternative.
And why is that choice made? I mean, what is at the heart of their conviction that detente with Iran is doable, feasible, on the right path?
Right. They believe that Iran and the United States have overlapping interests, and they believe that historically the anti-Iranian agenda of the Saudis and the Israelis was preventing the United States from realizing the potential of those overlapping interests. And so the United States, by distancing itself somewhat from Saudi Arabia and Israel, and dealing directly with Tehran on its own terms, over the heads basically of the Israelis and the Saudis, is the best way to stabilize the Middle East.
So this is probably unfair to say this, but I'll say it anyway. This is almost an opportunity for the Americans to impress upon Tehran that it will keep up its end of the bargain.
That's exactly what they're doing. That the Biden team believes that it can arrive at an agreement of mutual non-belligerency with Iran, and it's offering that to Tehran over and over again. Has offered it to them, and it believes that is the best way to deal. That's the best framework in which to deal with Iran. Mutual non-belligerency, understanding that relations were never going to be perfectly smooth, that they're not wonderful people in Tehran, that they harbor some hostility to us, or a lot of hostility to us.
But if you can rise above it,
you can rise above it. You can manage that hostility in the most intelligent way, fashion, and that's why they're proud of it, because they think that Peter, unlike Zionist Jews, unlike evangelical Christians, unlike people like you, Peter, who are defense-minded, Republicans who are like little boys playing war games. They are a cut above. They're very sophisticated. They're not operating according to emotions. They are managing the world. And they're very proud of that.
So when you travel to Israel and talk to the Israelis, how do they view the Biden administration? They're
confused. They're confused. They don't understand what I just said to you, most of them.
What do they see? What sows this confusion in their minds?
On the one hand, they're tremendously grateful for the support that they're getting in Gaza. And they see that Biden, time and time again, has said no ceasefire, and that he has stood up to the left wing, the progressive wing of his party. Mm-hmm. And they realize that they're pretty much alone in the world without the United States. And so they're very grateful for that support. They are confused when they see the United States not responding to Iran after it attacks. I mean, everyone understands that those militias in Iraq and Syria that have attacked American bases directly are not just proxies of Iran, that they are puppets of Iran under the direct command and control of Tehran. And they don't understand why the Americans are not hitting back. They don't understand why the Americans are restraining them in terms of hitting the Houthis, but then not. There have been two major attacks at the time of the time that we're taping this. There have been two major attacks by the U.S. against the Houthis. And the first one was really a warning shot. The second one was a step above a warning shot, but they still haven't gone after senior leaders and Iranians on the ground.
Well, and did they not warn the Iranians? I mean, was there, maybe this is misinformation, but I thought I saw an important Iranian platform sail away prior to the strikes.
Well,
we'd all but telegraphed it.
They telegraphed it. I mean,
Right.
It was a huge, big windup.
Right.
They had a bullhorn and they said, "There's a strike coming. There's a strike coming. Hey, there's a strike coming." That's what I mean by it was a warning shot, really.
Right. If that's how the Israelis see the United States, confused, support on the one hand, insufficiently taking up their great power responsibilities on the Iran file on the other, how has the relationship with China changed during the course of this conflict?
They see, that's another reason why they're thankful for America. They see that the social media and the diplomatic statements of the Russians and the Chinese is more hostile than ever before. I mean, than in recent memory. Something closer to like what it was in the Cold War, and they're shocked by that.
Shocked.
The speed with which the world just changed. Our colleague John Casapoulou likes to talk about the Star Wars versus Mad Max, saying that in the military condition of the world, there are people in places like Israel, the United States, Europe, who think the future of warfare is Star Wars, where we're going to push a button, from a control room and zap our enemies from the sky, versus Mad Max, people who are going to be dirty warriors in the trenches, fighting with very modern weapons and also some not so modern weapons at the same time, a hybrid kind of warfare. And he says the world is Mad Max; it's not Star Wars. And I think the Israelis were very much in a Star Wars mindset, not just about military terms, but to me the greatest symbol of it is this Nova dance festival that was taking place right next to Gaza. I mean, you got 1.5, 2 million people who hate you. If given the chance, they want to rape you and dismember you. And you're having a rave right
with no security, apparently.
With very, very limited security right next to it, completely unaware of the disparity.
Yeah.
And that's those days are over now. I mean, everyone is aware that they were, but it's kind of I think it's a good example of the different mindsets.
How is the war going itself in Gaza?
It's depends on which Israeli channel you watch. Israelis have channel 11, 12, 13, and 14. 1, 2, 3, and 4 really, with a 1 in front of them. And channel 14 is Fox News, and channel 12 is MSNBC or NBC, CBS. And if you're watching the two different channels, you see two different realities basically. The war in pure military terms, I think, is going pretty well. In terms of they are defeating the enemy. The question is, are they going to be able to turn the military victory on the ground into any kind of lasting political benefit, both in Gaza and in the north and against Hezbollah? Officially, the government has 3 war aims that the cabinet has decided on. That's dismantling Hamas as a serious military threat to Israel, dismantling it as a political organization capable of ruling Gaza, and returning the hostages. They've taken over most of the Gaza Strip, or at least asserted military control over most of the Gaza Strip. There are 2 cities in the south where Rafah and Khan Yunis, where they have not asserted total control. I suspect, nobody has said this, I suspect that one of the reasons why they have not asserted control there is that that Hamas is successfully using the hostages as human shields, and the government is in a kind of dilemma. There's a growing movement supported by elements of by American diplomacy to find a deal that will return all of the hostages. There's a deep desire in Israeli culture to free hostages. That's also been kind of weaponized by Netanyahu's enemies, and they're trying to they are trying to insist that this war will be lost if the hostages aren't returned, and the hostages should be returned first before Hamas is defeated. You can't have a hostage deal without a deal to return the hostages that Hamas is holding, unless Israel gives up detainees that it has in its prisons. These are hardened terrorists. So that would be and also Hamas is also demanding that an end to a extended ceasefire. So there's a growing desire for this among the Israelis. I don't know what percentage of the population wants a deal like that, but it's probably higher than 20%, maybe 30%. And the American diplomacy is breathing life into that.
If the Israelis insist that they have Jenin-style access into Gaza going forward, so they will have an ability to at least go in and out of essentially any part of Gaza as they see fit and as they wish. As a thought experiment, why not make a trade for the hostages, and then there's no guarantee in the sort of shadow of the future that you can't just rearrest these people?
That's exactly what the people who are for it are arguing. They're saying we owe it. There are some people making this argument in good faith. Mm-hmm. There's some people who are making it in order to topple Netanyahu, because Netanyahu politically has said, basically, it's clearly signaled that he's going to stay in power until victory. So if victory, but he's also increasingly saying it's going to be a long war, because the Americans have put pressure on him to move to targeted strikes rather than full spectrum high intensity combat, and that's slowing him down, slowing down the war effort. So the opponents of Netanyahu are saying, well, no, the war has to end sooner. And one way to do that is with a ceasefire for the hostages. So they're weaponizing the hostages in that way. But then there are people who are legitimately, sincerely, without any reference to Netanyahu whatsoever, are saying what you said. We owe it. We betrayed those people who were taken hostage on October 7th. We owe it to them to bring them home. We have superiority over Hamas in the long run. We release those people, and then we go back to war.
Especially because the war aims wouldn't be met just because the hostages are released based on what the cabinet's laid out. So you could theoretically liberate your hostages, trade for them, get them all back, and then continue on with the war, unless
theoretically, but
that isn't a possibility, because Hamas would insist on a ceasefire and have the backing of the international community.
That's the point. Number one, they grow stronger because the ceasefire that they will demand, it will be an extended ceasefire.
Right.
They will demand all of the detainees be returned. There will be huge political controversy in Israel. The Israelis will start fighting with each other, and the goal of this, from the point of view of the Americans and the international community, the people in the international community that are pushing it, is actually not just to have an extended ceasefire, but to bring the war to an end, and Hamas will remain in power. That's the argument against. And if Hamas remains in power, even in a weakened state, it wins.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the number one war aim that the Israelis have set out. I listened to a podcast that Jake Sullivan participated in. The headlines that came out of it were related to Russia, Ukraine, but if you listen to it in its entirety, he was pressed at one point by the podcast hosts were sort of center-left public figures, and the audience was comprised of sort of center-left, leftist, or left-leaning Americans. Why the administration hadn't used more public pressure on Israel to date, given the horrific nature of what's happening in Gaza, the number of civilians killed, et cetera, that are reported on regularly. And his answer was that he believes, and the administration believes, that the posture they've adopted to date has been most successful in moving the Israelis. So public support and then privately pressuring. Although saying that in a podcast then suggests you're not privately pressuring, and the leaks to the media kind of go against that as well. But then following that podcast, I saw him in Israel in a sit-down interview with an Israeli anchor. This is when he visited.
Yonit Levy.
Yeah, and he when pressed about the differences between the United States and Israel, he spoke about trying to talk to the war cabinet about moving to a lower operational tempo. But he doesn't want to talk about any differences because he doesn't want to telegraph to the enemy when or how that might take place. Two very different answers depending upon the audience he was speaking to.
Well, but he is of course. I mean, that whole interview took place with one of the questions she asked him was, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said there will not be a two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority, and you're saying the opposite. And he says, well, I don't want to characterize what our discussions and so on, but clearly this is all playing out in public. This is not
right.
There's nothing secret here, and this is public pressure by the Americans on Netanyahu.
So, what is the source of this disagreement? If President Biden had to say, what would the political settlement look like, and if Prime Minister Netanyahu has his druthers, what does the day after the end of kind of combat operations look
well,
like?
what the Americans are saying is that there's no lasting political settlement in Gaza without a viable Palestinian partner. That only possible partner is the Palestinian Authority. Yes, the Palestinian Authority is a bit weak at the moment, so we need to revitalize it. And that we need to revitalize it and then install it in Gaza, and then move from there to a two-state solution.
I can feel the alliteration coming, like revitalize, reform, restore. Maybe this
yeah,
could be the
it's
new
just like
Ds,
it's like all the
depressurize, de-escalate, diplomacy.
Yeah, they have the D words and they have the D. The administration has the D words and the R words. Yeah, and and what Netanyahu is saying is. What he says publicly is Israel has to maintain overall security control of the Gaza Strip. So there can't be an international authority or a Palestinian authority that is responsible for the Gaza Strip. On the security questions, Israel has to have control of security.
But that kind of harkens back to the Area ABC concepts from Oslo, does it not?
That's what. Yeah, this is a. That's what I think the Israelis have in mind. It's a minefield for Netanyahu on the right, because the extreme right-wing elements of his coalition want not just to have security control, they want to reestablish Jewish settlements in Gaza and make it sovereign Israeli territory.
You were in the White House in 2005 when, or perhaps not yet, were you in the White House in 2005 when Sharon pulled out of Gaza?
I was, yeah. I got an award.
You did?
Inside the White House, yeah, for my role in the Gaza withdrawal.
What was the award?
Just for,
the de-escalation diplomacy.
The de-escalation diplomacy and revitalization.
Excellent. Congratulations. Was there a lot of pressure on Sharon at the time? I remember the sort of the fashionable public opinion being that, this is inappropriate because it needs to be connected to the political track of a two-state solution, et cetera. It was a unilateral Israeli mood. But just thinking about the shifts in the Overton window over the years, now a return to that is beyond the pale. Back then it was...
I think there was a...
state of play.
So I came into the White House in 2005.
Okay.
And just in time for Gaza withdrawal.
Just in time for your award?
Just in time for my award, yeah. I didn't. I wasn't part of the. I wasn't part of the negotiations leading up to it. So I don't know to what extent we twisted Sharon's arm, and to what extent he was willing to withdraw from Gaza. I suspect it was a little bit of both, but the overall atmosphere among Israelis, the prevailing wind in the at the time that he represented was a desire for separation between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Because this is after the Second Intifada.
After the Second Intifada, there was a growing sense among Israelis. There was the excitement about Oslo and the belief in the possibility of a two-state solution. After the Second Intifada, the Israelis started to realize that the Palestinians had not shifted as most Westerners had in their mind. That most Westerners were thinking that the struggle between the Israelis and the Palestinians is over the 67 lines, not over the 48 lines. The Second Intifada taught the Israelis that a significant violent element of among the Palestinians had not given up on the 48 question. And so but
the move was controversial at the time, wasn't it? Or do I have that wrong? The Sharon's decision to pull out. I mean, it was critiqued by...
On the left, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, because on the left, anything the Israelis do is wrong. Right. So the critique was that he hadn't accepted a two-state solution, and it was a unilateral step taken without coordination with the Palestinians. But there was coming to an agreement with the Palestinians on a two-state solution was impossible. So the whole thing was the whole idea was we're going to start creating an alternative world where we and the Palestinians are not in friction with each other in day-to-day life.
Okay.
Separation.
Okay. And how do the major states in the region view this? I mean, what is their posture on the conflict at present?
They want it not to burn them. They say they want a two-state solution, and they express concern about the Palestinians, but you will not find a lot of pressure, concern about the plight of the Palestinians. You will not find a lot of pressure on the Americans coming from America's Arab allies about a ceasefire. I mean, you noticed that there was the COP28 in the UAE, and Herzog, President Herzog, went there and was accepted.
Right.
That's a pretty clear sign. It's a very strong sign that they want Hamas defeated, because they understand that Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood, which wants to topple them. Hamas is a proxy of Iran, which is their great rival.
So in a way, this kind of comes back to the divisions we've had now for years between those who say that absent a two-state solution, you'll never be able to forge peace with the rest of the region, and others who would say if Israel shows strength and ability and has a lot to offer, then they're more likely to be able to bring about normalization.
I'm in the latter category.
Yeah, right.
It's not
But that really hasn't changed in a way, even though the world did change October 7th. But that dividing line, that mental map still exists.
Yes, it still exists. I mean, the whole question, though, is American policy.
Right.
Because if America is not going to back Israel to victory, then the Arabs know, as the Saudis, the Emiratis, and everyone else understands that if they're not going to back Israel to victory against an Iranian proxy, are they going to back America? Is Washington going to back America's allies? America's Arab allies? No.
Yeah.
So they'll make their calculations accordingly.
Yeah. And the Iranians invented chess, so
They did. Did you know Persians? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very clever people.
Yeah, very clever. You when you came back, you said to me, this was non-camera. You said to me that the trip confirmed some of your conceptions and thoughts. Is there anything that dramatically surprised you, where you thought maybe I got this reading wrong, or something that almost sort of was palpable there that you can't get from afar?
Yeah, a number of things. There were things in domestic politics and things in defense policy. In domestic policy, I came away with this sense of kind of paradoxes of the war. So the war has really unified Israeli society, in the sense that they are unified behind the goals of destroying Hamas. But the elite is continuing. All of the old fights that preceded the war are being carried out, knowing full well, are continuing to be prosecuted, knowing full well that the public is evaluating. I'm talking about the political echelon is continuing to jockey along the same lines as before, knowing full well that they are being judged by the public for their support for the unity that the public feels. So there's this tectonic shift, and tectonic shifts give rise to mountains, and there's a temporary mountain that has appeared from the war, and that's Gantz, because Gantz is a cipher. He's a former military man. He doesn't talk a lot. Nobody knows what he really thinks about a lot of things. When he does express himself, he says, we have to be unified. So he gets the great benefit of, because being a military man, he was in opposition to Netanyahu, but he joined the national unity government for the purpose of the war. So he's the great beneficiary of the public's desire for unity. And if you look in the polls now, he's way up in the polls, and Netanyahu is way down. Anyone who was in power on October 7th has lost stature tremendously, and that includes Netanyahu. So Gantz's star is very high, and the Americans love Gantz. So the pressure that the Americans are putting on Netanyahu over a two-state solution and everything, they would love to see. They'd love to see Netanyahu fall and Gantz come into power, but Gantz has this mountain that was created by October 7th is it's a mountain of sand. I mean, it's very precarious for him because he knows the entire Israeli public does not want a two-state solution. When Netanyahu comes out and says, I will not allow a two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority, he is speaking for 90% or 85%, some very huge percentage of the Israeli public. The Israeli feeling on a two-state solution in the public shifted way to the right. So this is the paradox. The paradox is public opinion unified and shifted to the right, but the immediate beneficiary of this feeling is Gantz, who's on the left. And he knows if he comes out for a two-state solution, then he's toast. The other problem is...
So he just offers sort of banalities like war is dark.
Yes, right.
Hostages are important.
Yeah, they're just continuing to make statements that are not controversial and that express the unity.
Right.
But how he may succeed if there were elections that were held soon, he might succeed in capitalizing on them, but he's not going to last long.
The parallels to Ukraine are actually rather eerie because I mean, it's different in the sense that Israel faces a horrible moment, but it's not an existential one necessarily. It could turn into that, but it isn't at present. Ukraine, obviously, from moment one, was facing its own survival and potentially being eaten alive by the Russians. But there's this national unity. It matters a lot to the public. Zelensky was a beneficiary of it. But if you go to dinner in Kyiv or talk to the Ukrainians, the opposition will vote, for example, for a continuation of martial law because it's such an existential moment. But they're beginning to complain about the presidential administration office, et cetera, and normal politics, which is a healthy thing too, begin to reassert themselves. And Zelensky is now, in a way, being crushed by American policy, which is declining to back him sufficiently so that he can achieve those goals which he has set out, and that is, liberating his country. So it's not quite the same, but I see
the parallels. The other thing that I came away with is the importance of the Lebanon. I mean, I've always thought this, but the war in Lebanon is in some ways more important than Gaza. Because Hezbollah is 10 times, 20 times, 30 times more powerful than Hamas. Hezbollah has succeeded in depopulating the north of the country, and it is backed by Iran more directly than Hamas is, and it is also protected to a certain extent by the Americans. This is another thing that mystifies the Israelis because they're getting all this support from Biden, but yet he's restraining them in Lebanon. And when he first restrained them, they thought it was just kind of a wise decision to go Gaza first, then the north. There were plenty of Israelis who thought that was the right thing to do. There were some who thought, no, we should go against our more powerful enemy first and then the weaker one. This is a kind of a trap if we go into Gaza. But it was a legitimate argument to say, go Gaza first and then Hezbollah. But now they're increasingly understanding that the Americans will not support a war against Hezbollah ever. And the consequence of that is that Hezbollah wins the war. Because the residents of the north will not.
Well, that's just it. I mean, it's a small country, and to depopulate your north is absolutely unacceptable to the Israelis. So
this is part of the trap for Gantz, the Gantz Mountain. How's the Gantz Mountain going to do with the two-state solution, and how's the Gantz Mountain going to handle what's going to happen to the Gantz Mountain when he has to really contend with the American demands on a two-state solution, and what's going to happen if he doesn't support a reassertion of Israeli control over the north.
But right now, it's still Prime Minister Netanyahu who's willing to defy the Americans on two-state solution. Is he prepared to do the same on the north, or is that beyond his mandate, so to speak, that he set out for fighting this war? I mean, how does he define the war? Presumably larger than just Gaza.
I've had the same argument with Israelis over and over again, or like discussion. Many Israelis believe, this is one of the things I came away with from the trip. You asked me that a lot of Israelis believe that come April, there's going to be a serious war in the north. And they talk about it like it's inevitable. I talked to lots of soldiers. I think if you get to soldiers at the sort of major captain level in the north, they say yes, it's inevitable, because they can see all of what you just said, that if we cannot repopulate the north, we lose. We have to actually secure the north. It can't be secured through diplomacy, which is what the Americans are offering. Hezbollah has to be pushed back by force. So they run all the calculations, and they see the intense political imperative that any government is going to feel to do that, and they say there will be war. I say I don't think so.
Because the U.S. is so important, or
because the U.S. is going to say no,
right?
And they're going to be wrapped. They're going to be wrapped around the axle in Gaza for another year and a half. And they need the Americans for that.
It's not really productive to do these hypotheticals, but I'll try one anyway. So, if a war does kick off in the north,
the only reason it's not productive to do hypotheticals is that it puts one in danger of saying things that later will be thrown back at you.
That's right. But early on, in the early days after October 7th, the administration, I think the president himself, and the national security advisor, anyways, senior officials whose credibility in these matters should matter a lot, said that they will hold the Iranians responsible for Hezbollah unloading on Israel. If the opening...
They never said that.
Oh, they didn't?
No.
Okay.
No, they were very careful about not saying that. Israelis said they said that, but then Biden...
I'm reading what people thought they heard.
Yeah. They read the body language as saying that. They were careful not to say it.
I see. So then, to take that further or forward,
I think it's not a pedantic point.
No, not at all. And your point then is, if Israel fired the first, there are shots being fired back and forth. The Iranians are depopulating in the north, forcing the Israelis to move south. But if the Israelis decided to mount an actual operation, and Hezbollah really began to open up, you don't think the administration would back the Israelis to the hilt?
It puts them in a really horrible situation. First of all, it gores their favorite ox. Is that a phrase?
Yeah.
Because it's the
Iranians invented it, who also invented chess.
It's a wonderful Iranian saying, ancient.
Ancient.
The
kings of yesteryear.
It destroys the
Safavids.
It destroys the administration's Iran policy.
Right.
That's they believe that they're able to settle regional conflicts through diplomacy with Tehran. And that's what the administration is trying to do. It's trying to negotiate with Tehran over the heads of the Israelis and Hezbollah to settle the border conflict.
And I suppose the Iranians are signaling, if we care this much about Hamas, don't touch Hezbollah.
Yeah, and the Israelis are trying. There's all this signaling, this kind of four-way signaling going on, because the Israelis are one of the reasons they're hitting Hamas as hard as they are. And Gallant, the defense minister, says it all the time. Watch it, Hezbollah. You see what we're doing to Gaza? If you escalate, Gaza is going to be Beirut, or Beirut is going to be Gaza, and the Israelis are hitting high-value targets in Lebanon and in Syria as well, in order to signal to Iran and Hezbollah that they will not be restrained by the Americans.
And if you don't have credit for Gaza, and that I do know Tony Blinken said, imagine what the words are about potentially an operation in the north, which would, I presume, be 10 times as bloody,
You're
difficult,
saying that,
messy.
that Blinken came to Jerusalem and was quoted in one media outlet as saying to the Israelis that you don't have enough credit to continue the war for months. You have to bring the war to an end.
And this is, I think, one of those meetings that will go down in the history books. It was a 10-hour, I think, marathon session with the war cabinet, and then he went maybe to the embassy or somewhere and announced that the president was going to be coming in the next 48 hours or something like that, or the end of the week. So it's one of those that I'm sure in Tony Blinken's memoirs someday will get prominent.
I think you mixed up a couple of different meetings.
I did. Okay,
but that's okay.
Yeah, it's all.
I'm
playing chess, not checkers.
You got.
All right. Well, on that note, maybe we should wrap it up, and we'll be back to Israel, I'm sure, soon on Counterbalance.
Well, thank you for having me on Counterbalance.
It's an honor to have you.
I hear this is the fastest growing podcast in the world.
It is, yeah. No longer just in the United States.
No, it's global.
Yeah, it's global.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
Everyone's saying it.
Everyone's saying it. Many people, actually. Yeah.
Very, very important people.